On May 1st, 1944, at 2:47 a.m., 12,000 feet above Nazi-occupied France, Phyllis Lure Doyle poised at the open hatch of a B-24 bomber, gazing into the abyss. At 23 years old, standing 5 feet 3 inches and weighing 115 pounds, she carried no weapons, no communication devices, no identification. Merely a bicycle, a pouch of soap, and a ball of yarn accompanied by 2 knitting needles. The jumpmaster's voice cut through the engine's roar. 30 seconds. Doyle meticulously checked her parachute harness. Her hands were steady, her heart anything but. Beneath her, 50,000 Nazi troops garrisoned Normandy. Gestapo agents patrolled every village, and French collaborators vigilantly reported any suspicious activity. The 4 operatives who had preceded her into this sector were all deceased, captured, tortured, and executed within days. British intelligence had relayed these grim statistics before her flight, offering a final chance to withdraw. She declined. Doyle plunged into the darkness, free-falling as the wind violently buffeted her clothing through the night sky. At 1,000 feet, then 2,000, she deployed her ripcord. The parachute unfurled with a jolt, pulling her upwards. The bomber's thunderous din was replaced by profound silence. Below, the French landscape unfolded in moonlit swaths of woodlands and cultivated fields. No illumination, no movement, just obscurity and the faraway bark of a dog. She landed in a wheat field at 3:12 a.m., retrieved her parachute, buried it in a drainage ditch, and donned the attire of an impecunious French adolescent. By daybreak, she was pedaling along a country lane, a basket of soap secured to her handlebars and a ball of yarn in her pocket. Should anyone inquire, she was petite, a teenager selling soap in an effort to scrape by. No one would surmise that the knitting needles concealed in her bag harbored the most perilous secret in occupied France. Phyllis Lure was born in South Africa in 1921. Her father passed away during her infancy, and her mother subsequently married a race car driver who perished in an accident when Phyllis was 3. Tragedy marked her early years, yet it also forged a profound fearlessness. By age 20, she had enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force in England as a flight mechanic. She possessed a keen intellect, fluency in French, and an exceptional ability to discern details others overlooked. The British Special Operations Executive recognized her talents. This organization, Churchill's clandestine force, recruited civilians for espionage and sabotage activities behind enemy lines, operating under the terse motto, "Set Europe ablaze." In 1943, they extended an offer of employment to Phyllis. The recruiter warned her of the inherent dangers, stating that most agents did not survive. Phyllis accepted without hesitation. Her godmother's father, whom she regarded as a grandfather, had been executed by the Nazis, and her godmother had taken her own life after being apprehended by the Gestapo. She sought retribution and was prepared to forfeit her life for it. The training regimen was designed to dismantle participants. For 6 arduous months, Phyllis resided at a secluded estate in the Scottish Highlands, entirely cut off from external contact. No correspondence, no telephone calls, just relentless preparation for a mission likely to prove fatal. She rose daily at 5 a.m., enduring a 5-mile run through freezing rain, mastering hand-to-hand combat from instructors who had personally killed adversaries, and practicing silent assassination techniques, approaching a sentry from behind, knife usage, and noiselessly breaking a neck. The physical conditioning was brutal, but the psychological conditioning was even more severe. The SOE required agents who could convincingly prevaricate under any circumstances. They conducted simulated interrogations, abrupt nocturnal arrests, intense lighting, shouted questions, and feigned assaults. Agents who succumbed were sent home. Those who persevered were dispatched to France. Phyllis cultivated the ability to maintain her cover story under duress, responding calmly to questions despite her racing heart, and lying directly to someone's face without betraying emotion. She learned to scale structures with the agility of a cat burglar, instructed by an actual burglar recruited from a London prison. She mastered lockpicking in under 30 seconds, memorizing maps only to destroy them and navigate solely by recall, and dissolving into a crowd to re-emerge as a different individual. She learned to identify Gestapo agents by their footwear, hairstyles, and their manner of surveying a room. She discerned which French phrases denoted an educated background and which marked her as a peasant. She acquired the skill to instantly alter her voice, posture, and entire persona. However, her most critical skill was the deceptively simple act of knitting. The SOE had devised a messaging system utilizing silk strips imprinted with 2,000 distinct codes. Each code was intended for a single use. Transmitting each message via Morse code required 30 minutes. The system's elegance lay in its simplicity. The silk strips, as delicate as tissue paper, bore rows of letters and numbers. To encrypt a message, Phyllis would select a code from the strip, then pierce it with a pin to mark it as consumed. Even if the Germans intercepted the strip, they could not decipher previous communications, as each code was unique. Yet, the system was vulnerable if the silk strips themselves were discovered. The challenge lay in concealing the codes. German soldiers subjected everyone to thorough searches, checking documents, bags, and clothing. They sought hidden compartments, invisible ink, and microfilm. Suspected agents were subjected to strip searches. Luggage was x-rayed, and dogs trained to detect specific inks and papers were employed. But knitting supplies were never searched. Phyllis ingeniously wrapped her silk code strips around her knitting needles. The slender strips seamlessly blended with the wooden surface. She also wove them into the flat shoelaces she used to secure her hair, and hid tiny strips within tightly wound balls of yarn, rendering them imperceptible. Her SOE handlers had rigorously tested these concealment methods. German soldiers had repeatedly searched dozens of knitting baskets without discovering anything. The needles appeared to be ordinary needles, the yarn, ordinary yarn. Even upon close inspection, the silk strips remained undetectable to anyone unaware of their presence. A young girl knitting by the roadside. What could be more innocuous? What could be more lethal? Her mission, straightforward in its description, was almost impossible to accomplish. Parachute into Nazi-occupied Normandy, gather intelligence on German troop deployments, fortifications, and movements, and transmit coded messages back to Britain. She was to do this for months, constantly mobile, trusting no one, acutely aware that capture meant torture and death. The intelligence she collected would be instrumental in planning the largest amphibious invasion in human history, D-Day. Everything hinged on precisely knowing German strengths and weaknesses. The landing beaches required scrupulous selection. Paratroopers needed precise drop zones. Bombers needed accurate targets. Phyllis was one of numerous agents relaying information to London, but she operated in the most crucial sector, the Normandy coastline, where 135,000 Allied soldiers would soon storm ashore. If she failed, thousands of men would perish on beaches the Germans had already fortified. If she was apprehended, she would die knowing she had failed them. For 3 months, Phyllis traversed the villages of Normandy by bicycle. She covered 20 to 30 miles daily, her legs aching from the hilly coastal roads. She sold soap door to door, actual soap, not a mere ruse. The soap provided a legitimate reason to knock on doors, enter homes, and linger in villages where German troops were stationed. She smiled at German soldiers, flirted with officers in cafes, laughing at their jokes while mentally cataloging their unit insignia, vehicle markings, and casual remarks about reinforcements and redeployments. Many of these officers never suspected that the seemingly shy French teenager comprehended every word of their German conversations. Phyllis's mother had taught her German as a child, and during SOE training, she had refined her comprehension to the point where she could follow rapid military discussions without betraying her understanding. She meticulously noted troop numbers, not estimations, but precise counts. She identified vehicle types by their silhouettes and engine sounds. She mapped artillery positions by observing where shells landed during target practice. She charted supply routes by counting trucks and timing their arrivals. Every detail was crucial. The distinction between 500 and 5,000 soldiers could determine whether a beach was chosen for landing or avoided. The location of a single artillery battery could save or condemn hundreds of paratroopers. She committed everything to memory. She never recorded notes during the day, as it was too perilous if she were searched. Instead, she employed memory techniques taught by the SOE, crafting mental images that solidified information until she could encode it. At night, in whichever hideout she had secured, she would retrieve her silk strips and undertake the laborious process of encoding her observations into 5-letter groups, suitable for Morse transmission. Transmitting was the most perilous aspect of her mission. German radio detection units could pinpoint a transmission within 90 minutes. They possessed mobile direction-finding trucks that triangulated signals, progressively narrowing the search area. Once they neared, foot patrols equipped with portable detectors would sweep the area until the transmitter was located. Agents apprehended were never seen again. Phyllis never remained in one location for more than 60 minutes. She would set up her compact suitcase transmitter in a barn, tap out her message in Morse code, then pack up and cycle 5 miles to a forest before the detection trucks could arrive. From the forest, she would transmit again, then relocate to a farmhouse, transmit, and move on. She developed an uncanny sixth sense for danger. A distant truck engine, a dog barking at an inopportune moment, the sudden absence of birdsong signaling movement through the woods. On one occasion, she was mid-transmission when she heard the distinctive whine of a German radio detection truck. She estimated she had approximately 3 minutes before her location was pinpointed. She completed her message. The intelligence was too vital to abandon. Then, she disassembled her transmitter in 45 seconds. She carefully placed it into a concealed compartment within her bicycle basket, shielding it with soap and yarn, and cycled off just as a truck emerged on the road behind her. The soldiers observed a teenage girl pedaling homeward in the waning daylight. They did not intercede. She sought slumber in ditches, haystacks, and within the homes of French resistance members who jeopardized their lives to offer her refuge. Several of these families had children younger than herself. They sustained her with their meager provisions and never posed questions. On some nights, sleep eluded her entirely. Fear kept her awake. Not the dread of death, but the apprehension of failure. A fear that she might overlook something crucial. A fear that her subsequent transmission would be her last. When hunger gnawed, she foraged for sustenance in the woodlands. When cold embraced her, she enveloped herself in scarves she had knitted during countless hours of vigilance. She was perpetually knitting, ceaselessly observing, constantly listening. The German soldiers who encountered her on the thoroughfare perceived nothing more than a humble girl navigating arduous times. They never discerned the silk strips secreted within her knitting needles. They never noticed her cataloging their vehicles. They never suspected that every intricate detail of their positions was conveyed to London within hours. Close calls occurred weekly, sometimes daily. On one occasion, a Gestapo officer halted her on the road, demanding to inspect her papers. He was youthful, perhaps 25, with chilling eyes and a leather coat that marked him as secret police. Her fabricated documents identified her as Pette, born in a village 200 kilometers distant. The documents were flawless. Sceaux's forgery department meticulously replicated authentic French identity cards, down to the paper texture and ink hue. Yet, documents could only provide limited protection. The true trial lay in the interrogations. "Where are you going?" "To Saint-Lô, sir, to sell soap." "Where did you sleep last night?" "With my cousin in Carrington." "Her name is Marie Dubois." Every response was a fabrication. But Phyllis delivered them with the weary sincerity of a girl who had answered these inquiries 100 times before. No hesitation, no trepidation, merely a peasant girl desirous of completing her errands and returning home. The officer scrutinized the papers for an extended duration. Then, his gaze shifted to her knitting basket. "What are you crafting?" Phyllis presented a half-finished sock. "For my brother. He's employed in Germany." Another untruth. She had no brother. But thousands of Frenchmen had been conscripted to labor in German factories, and their sisters often knitted socks for them. The narrative was so prevalent, it went unnoticed. The officer returned her papers and waved her onward. Phyllis cycled away at an ordinary pace. She did not glance back. She did not accelerate. Only when she was out of sight did she pull off the road and await the cessation of her trembling hands. Another time, she was transmitting from a farmhouse when the drone of approaching vehicles reached her ears. Multiple engines, a German patrol. She had a mere 30 seconds to conceal her radio equipment. The transmitter, the size of a small suitcase, was too bulky for swift concealment, yet too precious to abandon. She thrust it beneath a loose floorboard that the farmer had indicated, sprinkled dust over the crevices, and seized her knitting. By the time the soldiers entered, she was seated by the window, composedly working on a scarf, counting stitches as if she had been there for hours. "Papers!" She handed them over without rising. Let them approach her. Let them witness a girl interrupted from her labor, annoyed but compliant. They rummaged through the house. They opened cupboards. They peered under the bed. One soldier stood directly upon the floorboard, concealing her transmitter. They discovered nothing. Upon their departure, Phyllis waited 20 minutes before she dared to breathe normally. Then, she retrieved her transmitter and completed her message. On a third occasion, a French collaborator noted that her accent was subtly amiss, too refined for a peasant girl. Collaborators were sometimes more perilous than the Germans. They comprehended local dialects. They detected minor details that foreign soldiers overlooked. This individual reported her to the local authorities, describing the girl with the knitting basket, who spoke French a little too perfectly. Phyllis vanished that night. She cropped her hair, altered her attire, and assumed a new identity. No longer Pet the soap seller, but Marie the seamstress. She relocated to a different sector 30 kilometers away. The collaborators' report led to an uninhabited farmhouse and a cold trail. The Gestapo pursued her for 2 weeks. They never apprehended her. She learned to trust no one, to assume constant surveillance, to perpetually vary her routines, never traversing the same path twice, never lingering in one location long enough to be remembered. Paranoia preserved her life. Between May and August 1944, Phyllis transmitted 135 encrypted messages to British intelligence. Each message contained precise details regarding German defenses in Normandy, troop concentrations at Omaha Beach, gun emplacements overlooking Utah Beach, tank positions near Caen, and patrol schedules along the coastal roads. She identified vulnerabilities in the Atlantic Wall, the formidable German fortification system spanning the French coast. She reported which sectors were heavily fortified and which were sparsely manned. She noted where reinforcements were being deployed and where units were being withdrawn. This intelligence flowed into the offices of Operation Overlord, the codename for the D-Day invasion. General Eisenhower's planners utilized information from agents like Phyllis to select the 5 landing beaches, to position 13,000 paratroopers who would drop behind German lines, and to target 11,000 aircraft that would bomb German positions before the invasion. Every decision carried the immense weight of thousands of lives. Landing on a heavily defended beach could doom the invasion. Dropping paratroopers in the wrong zone would result in their slaughter. Missing a concealed artillery battery could lead to landing craft being destroyed before reaching the shore. Phyllis's 135 messages were mere droplets in an ocean of intelligence. But each droplet held significance. Each piece of information contributed to completing a picture that no single agent could perceive. On June 6, 1944, Phyllis heard the thunderous roar of aircraft overhead. She was concealed in a woodland near the coast, awaiting the moment to transmit her morning report. But this phenomenon was distinct. This was no bombing raid or reconnaissance flight. These were thousands of planes. Wave after wave filled the expanse of the sky from horizon to horizon. C-47 transports, B-17 bombers, P-51 fighters. The largest aerial armada in human history, soaring towards the coastline. She observed from her forest clearing as the sky became densely populated with parachutes. American and British paratroopers descending behind enemy lines. Thousands of white canopies drifting downwards in the gray dawn light. She understood what this signified. The invasion had commenced. The intelligence for which she had risked her life was now, at this very instant, guiding those paratroopers to their designated drop zones. Hours later, the initial reports reached her via the resistance network. Allied forces had disembarked on 5 beaches along the Normandy coast. The conflict was ferocious. Thousands were perishing, yet the beachheads were steadfast. Thousands were perishing, but the beachheads held. Phyllis continued her work. The conflict was far from over. The Germans were launching counteroffensives. Every scrap of information she could gather had the potential to preserve lives. She transmitted throughout June and July. She witnessed the Allied forces advance inland, liberating one village after another. On August 25, 1944, Paris was liberated. Phyllis's mission was accomplished. She had survived what 4 men before her could not. 3 months behind enemy lines. 135 encoded messages. 0 detection. A 23-year-old girl with a bicycle and a ball of yarn had helped make D-Day a success. She returned to England quietly. No parades, no medals, no newspaper headlines. SOE operations were classified. The agents who survived reverted to their ordinary lives and never discussed their wartime activities. Phyllis wed an Australian engineer named Patrick Doyle. They nurtured 4 offspring. Their journey took them to Kenya, then Fiji, and subsequently New Zealand. For 6 decades, her children remained oblivious to their mother's past as a covert operative. The secret surfaced by happenstance. In 2009, her eldest son, while perusing the internet, stumbled upon his mother's name in a declassified SOE file. The document contained a brief summary. Agent codenamed Pet parachuted into France, May 1944. Transmitted 135 messages. Survived. He immediately contacted her. "Mom, were you a spy during the war?" A protracted silence ensued on the line. 65 years of unspoken truths. 65 years of guarding a secret that could have cost her life. Then Phyllis chuckled, a soft, surprised sound. "I suppose it's been long enough." "Yes, I was." Her children were astonished. They had known their mother as a serene woman who cherished knitting and gardening, who served tea and biscuits to callers, and who never spoke of the war beyond acknowledging it as a challenging period. They had never conceived that she had parachuted into Nazi-occupied France in the dead of night, that she had eluded the Gestapo for months while relaying encrypted messages. that she had contributed to planning the largest invasion in military annals. "Why did you never tell us?" her son inquired. "It wasn't the sort of subject one discussed," Phyllis responded simply. "We had pledged under the Official Secrets Act. We were instructed never to divulge our work. And truthfully, after the war, I simply yearned for a normal existence. I had experienced enough excitement." "But you could have been killed. You were a hero." "I was not a hero," Phyllis asserted firmly. "I was merely performing my duty. The heroes were the men who landed on those beaches. The paratroopers, the resistance fighters who were captured and executed. I merely dispatched messages." Her humility was genuine. The SOE had trained its operatives to toil in obscurity and vanish without commendation. That training had endured a lifetime. But her children would not permit the narrative to conclude there. They reached out to historians. They amassed documents. They meticulously pieced together the comprehensive account of their mother's wartime contributions. The world was finally enlightened in 2014, 7 decades after D-Day, when France officially recognized Phyllis Lard Doyle's extraordinary contributions. The French government dispatched a formal delegation to New Zealand, where Phyllis had resided for many years, to bestow upon her the Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, France's most distinguished award, instituted by Napoleon in 1802. The ceremony unfolded within a small hall in Auckland. Phyllis, then 93 years old, arrived in a wheelchair, propelled by her son. Her hair was white, her hands gnarled with age, yet her gaze remained sharp, mirroring the eyes that had observed German patrols and committed troop positions to memory 70 years prior. She wore her medals on a simple cardigan, not an elaborate gown or military attire, but the clothing of an ordinary woman who had lived an exceptional life. During the presentation, the French consul, speaking in both French and English, commended her intelligence gathering of exceptional value, extraordinary courage under constant threat of capture and death, vital contribution to the liberation of France, and the success of Operation Overlord. A hush fell over the room. Her children, seated in the front row, wept openly, realizing only then the true scope of their mother's identity. As the medal was pinned to her chest, Phyllis only uttered, "I'm glad I could help." When a reporter inquired about her most vivid memory from her time in France, she softly replied, "The fear and the loneliness." You couldn't trust anyone. You couldn't tell anyone who you really were. You were always alone, even when you were surrounded by people. The reporter then asked, "Was it worth it?" Phyllis gazed at the medal on her chest, then at her gathered children and grandchildren. "Yes," she affirmed, "it was worth it." She did not speak of the 4 men who perished before her, nor the months of concealment, the hunger, the pervasive dread, or the narrow escapes from the Gestapo. She made no mention of the haunting nightmares that had plagued her for decades. Dreams of capture, of failure, of witnessing the invasion falter because she hadn't been proficient enough. She simply accepted the commendation and returned to her knitting. Phyllis Lard Doyle passed away on October 22nd at the age of 102, the last surviving female spy of the Special Operations Executive. Her obituaries primarily highlighted the same key facts. Parachuted into France, transmitted 135 messages, aided in D-Day planning, and received the Legion of Honor at 93. However, the complete narrative transcends mere facts. It tells of a young woman who, having lost everyone she loved to Nazi brutality, chose to retaliate. She mastered hand-to-hand combat and the art of deceptive lying without hesitation. She concealed secrets within her knitting needles and relayed intelligence while German patrols scoured for her. Hers is a tale of courage that manifested in the guise of everyday existence. A girl on a bicycle, a basket of soap, a ball of yarn. The Germans never suspected her. They observed what they expected to see, an innocuous peasant girl knitting to pass the time. They never fathomed that her needles harbored codes, that her yarn concealed vital information, or that each scarf she fashioned was interwoven with intelligence destined to cripple their military. On June 6th, 135,000 Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy. Thousands more survived because the invasion strategists possessed precise knowledge of where to land and where to avoid. Information gathered by agents like Phyllis, conveyed through codes cunningly embedded in knitting supplies. One woman, one bicycle, one ball of yarn, and the unwavering courage to accomplish what 4 men before her could not. The next time you see someone knitting, remember Phyllis Lard Doyle. Recall that the most perilous weapon in occupied France was not a firearm or an explosive. It was a pair of knitting needles, and the woman who skillfully wielded them. If this narrative resonated with you, please press the like button. Each like signals to YouTube to share this story with a wider audience. Subscribe and activate notifications. We unearth forgotten heroes from history every week. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did you know knitting was employed for espionage in World War II? Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering Phyllis Lard Doyle. She helped rescue the world, yet her name remained largely unknown.